It is now my pleasure to introduce to you one of our two poetry mentors for this year, Leslie Adrienne Miller. I very much enjoy and respect Leslie's poetry, but I have to confess that I was probably first drawn to her work by the awesome titles of her 5 collections: Staying Up for Love, Ungodliness, Yesterday Had a Man in It, The Resurrection Trade, and quite possibly my favorite title, Eat Quite Everything You See, which I encourage all of you to do during the reception afterwards. A 6th collection, Y, is forthcoming from Grey Wolf Press in September. And if you want to take your phones at this particular moment and put in that her publication reading will be here on September 7th, I will allow that use of phones. About Leslie's poetry, Rosalind Brown wrote, Leslie Adrienne Miller knows extraordinary secrets and tells them with searing clarity about how love is a necessity, a comfort, an itch and an ache, the nexus where hope and fear and the image of the self in the world come together or, more often, fail to. During one of our seminars with Leslie, in which the group talked about rational understanding of text, Leslie said, "That may be the difference between poets and other people. Poets worry less." She went on to explain that poets tend to care less about the meaning of a work than they do about enjoying the experience, the emotion, the music of a piece. So tonight, we are fortunate to all be poets as we enjoy the experience, emotion, and music of our next reader. Please welcome Leslie Adrienne Miller.
Well, thank you both for such lovely readings. This has been a great evening, and thank all of the mentees. This has just been a marvelous group, and I'm going to be really sad to part ways with you at the end, but I'm going to see you all, I hope, a lot here at the Loft. And thank Jared for making all of it run so smoothly. I can't say enough how wonderful it is to be part of this program. I'm going to read to you first a couple of poems from the book The Resurrection Trade. It's a book that's largely based on ekphrastic poems, which are poems about works of art, except in this case the works of art are antique medical drawings, and like this one on the front. And a lot of the poems in the book center around an artist who was working in France in the 18th century, Gautier da Gautier, and he's the artist who did the work on the cover. And he has one piece that's sort of become iconic on the internet now called The Flayed Angel. And it's an anatomical drawing of a woman's back that's open. It's flayed. The skin is cut open and peeled back so that it looks like wings. He also, a couple of things you might need to know about him, he did his own dissections. He was an artist. He was trained as an artist, but he also worked on his own bodies. So he understood them in many ways. The Flayed Angel. Because her back is turned on us and peeled outward from the ribs, her namesake wings of skin surprise us into thinking Fra Angelico, who taught us all what textures wings might take in 2 dimensions, an undulating series of overlapping lines, a borrowing from feathers, waves in sand, nothing like the surface epidermis, marked with random blots or breathing glands seeking after air any way they can. If she were photograph or simple lines, less art or more science, what we'd miss is the man who had to be there in the flesh with his tray of graving tools and pair of living eyes, who had to read her with a knife and scrape the burr from every rib, who had to know the permanence of every cut. Dagoti's flaps of flesh are scored with etchings, textures, places where he meant the acid bath to eat a weave of shadow into copper plates, after which the inks pushed out their wells of dark on water, thighs, or fields, anywhere the light is kept from falling, places where the eye is urged to go but never see. So this angel's wings have corrugations, like boxes, cups, or woven fabric, a tidiness of purpose that belies the tease of bundled curls caught above the collar of her open spine in its red spindles of gristle. The artist must have thought the coif a kindness. Perhaps he even knew that women in the countryside made ready for a birth with combs and ribbons, believed first pains meant time for curls. So were these wings Dagoti's kindness too, his offer of a way she might escape the grave? Or should we read these artful cuts as consequence of process, a simple accident of God? It's true that in the French countryside at this time, when labor pains started, they started doing their hair because they had to look nice. I like that. This next poem I'm going to read is called Mirabilia, 1796, and it's based on a true story that happened in England of a woman who decided to fool everybody by trying to say that she had given birth to baby rabbits. And I wanted to read it because my neighbor's dog, my neighbor's little Jack Russell Terrier, unearthed a whole nest of baby rabbits this week in my yard, and I looked at them and I just thought of this poem, of this incident. Like, how would you'll see. Mirabilia, 1726. The local doctor took her for a gloomy sort, a little daft but strong. Her husband worked in cloth and got on her 3 live young before this last, most curious brood. A whole tribe of rabbits springing forth in groups of 3 or 4. Harvest in Surrey being nearly done, and maybe that year only meager store, leeks and turnips, a few thick-skinned gourds. Perhaps they'd been a little short, but rabbits were abundant, and her boy able in getting litters young and whole enough to plant in Mary's lap. Her roomy burrow readied from easy passage of 3 prior infant skulls. The village was ready, too, for some miracle of birth, even if it was just rabbits coming on with winter's chill. By her own report, Mary took a longing in the field one day when a rabbit sprang up like a bright idea from the dying Queen Anne's lace and giant fennel. So her 5 weeks' child, afloat in the womb, fell away that night in a dream. These blind and skinless babies curled in the child's lost place and drank of her waters, waited for light and a man midwife ready with belief. Even after churching, more rabbits fell from her marvelous loins in Gulliford, so the English court brought her into town to have a look. And though they caught the serving boy with pockets full of blind and slippery bunnies, and trundled Mary Toffs off to jail after her confession, the fact remained that she had fooled at least a half a dozen educated men by simply being what she was: mammal, mystery, cave and warren, unmapped womb, a woman. It's kind of hard to believe they threw her into jail for that, but they did. There's some wonderful Hogarth prints of this, too, of this woman in a courtroom with bunny rabbits running out from under her skirt. One more poem from the Resurrection Trade. This one's called The Death of Irony. My eye first caught him in the neighbor's bird bath, an enormous shimmering right down to his rolling eye, the white of it the only gap in all that sleek black. Sick, wounded, but upright and regal in the stone bowl. He watched across the fence as I tossed a ball to my 2-year-old, and it came to me that nothing with wings should sit still that long. When I went over, he flapped the feeble fan of his right wing and dragged one clenched claw over the lip of the stone. So I saw there was more than a simple broken part. His glossy neck bristled, and he glared at me before he lost his grip and fell. Had he been a swallow or even a robin, I'd have shoveled him into the alley on the spot. But he was like some movie of a bird, something intimate I'd never see so close again, only feel in the broad shadows and cackles of his kin falling over the neighborhood. So I took him a scoop of chicken feed, poured it over his beak as he rolled one eye in warning, and I took my child indoors straight away, thinking of how whatever it was that had downed that creature would bloom in the drops sucked from his prone corpse in the sun all day and fly in the night over and into the bodies of everyone I love. Still alive at dawn when I came again to see what could be done, his neck greasy and bare where some cat had taken its turn. He gazed at me once more before the spade came down on his head. But I was already elsewhere, thinking of how my husband's ex announced she'd dreamed about my son, how like her own he seemed. I'm going to read a couple of poems out of the new book. It's called Y, as in the Y chromosome. After all those long recitals, I decided I need a short one, so it's just Y. One of the guiding spirits of this book is Dr. Peter Mark Roget, and you probably all know him as the guy who is responsible for Roget's thesaurus. He actually wasn't a language guy at all. He was a scientist. He was a physiologist and a teaching doctor. And I read a couple of biographies of him, and they were quite different. But one of them interested me a lot because it suggested that his scientific career was over fairly early. He was sort of forced into retirement because Darwin came along. And Roget was a devout Christian, and he just couldn't take it. So his scientific career was gone, and in order to keep himself from becoming terribly depressed, he decided to create this thesaurus. And its creation is based very much on his classification of plants and animals. And that's why I've always loved the thesaurus, especially the old ones, and why I hate Microsoft's thesaurus, because it's nothing like the old ones. And in fact, I have a 1911 copy of Roget's, and I brought it in case anybody wants to look at it, because it's so cool. Anyway, this poem's called Roget's. As a writer, too, I suppose there's a certain amount of shame in admitting that you love thesauruses, but I've always loved them. There were years when she hid it, the yellow sheaf with its broken spine cloaked in masking tape, or the fact that she needed its spurious lists branching into each other like the fragile twig work on a climbing rose. It held sky away from sty, clove from cleave. Who knew that the architect himself needed to cheat, found the unbreakable syllables rolling away like so many marbles spilled from a child's palm? She depended on this approximate taxonomy, which turned out to be code following invisible instructions to rise through a canopy of hardier species. Very like is one of the stranger ways of saying yes. From Old English, lich, body or shape, likeness, a bodily sensation of familiarity, and the notion that we warm for what repeats us, favor that familiar we could feel with our fingers in the dark, the round of cup on the desk, or a knob finding the palm exactly where it should be. Rendering most similar to, as if the visage too were a map of wishing, blue eye seeking blue, and ruddy cheek seeking more of its own rudiment. Yes, then, to the face as a synonym, a seeking after echo, ultra, extra, a plus us. The doctor rounds the curve of the outer ear on the desk. Your ear, he says, though it's anyone's crude appendage, the fragile curl of cochlea behind, the stem of eustachian below, and blocked with a tiny row of ovals that could be canoes or seeds gathering under the starburst of infection. We could take the pencil from his spotted hand and finish out the sketch. All the cranial tunnels he has missed pressed under the sockets of the eyes, how the interior unfurls, cochlea, drum, incus, malleus, stapes, ampullae, membranous labyrinth, vestibular nerve, auriculus superior. Are these tunnels and chambers not gorgeous in their reach? Echo of an aria, the snail scooting its soft curl inward will perform in the empty gallery of the skull. This next poem is called Cambiata, which is a term for the boy's voice at the point when it's changing. And there's a figure in the poem, Jean-Baptiste Monnier. I don't know if any of you have ever seen this film. It's a French film called, I don't know what it's called in English, but it's called Les Choristes. It's a wonderful film. I recommend you Netflix it right away. It has this Jean-Baptiste Monnier singing, and he, at the time, was about 14, has the most haunting voice. You just can't imagine. It's a beautiful soprano voice. And of course, he doesn't have it anymore. It really, I listened to the CD so many times, and I looked hard for what happened to this boy, and not much. I mean, he tried to be an actor for a while, but this is someone who inspired all of France to send their boys to choir school. So this poem called Cambiata has a little epigraph from Andy Martin, who's a choral teacher. The male treble voice achieves its maximum power and resonance just as it's disappearing. So it's most beautiful just as it's disappearing. It hardly matters now whether we loved the child because he was real or because he was not. He played the boy's soprano who charmed his way out of a wilderness of lack, his clear voice risen like the surprise of a slender moon, finding its way between racks of cloud and pouring its whole into the visible wick. But what's left of Jean-Baptiste Monnier is only this moment held in the membrane through which we will always have to pour a beam of borrowed light, to see again the pale boy with the eyes of a wolf drop his jaw and sail the cadenza note by note from the rampart rim, before he's smothered in a sheaf of whispers on the street, Frimus, cherubim, angel. The life we remember him living was never his own. And the voice, too, he'd have to render back unto the fiction, that gift of unseen gods whose punishment is simply that the man will have to wear the clean surplice of his child self perpetually, that he will be handed the microphone again and again by some fallen star in a circus of TV light, and deliver ever after only ordinary music, the round nub of his Adam's apple rocking in grief. One more music poem, sort of. This one's called Bees. Yes, worry the word hard, the phrase, the color, the semantic families, breaks and fissures. Know that every bride to thought is doomed to less than hope demanded. No, not the word, only one letter short of all, but the little one that wore its bravado even in utero, from a time less in love with future as a cause, when utterance was barely dressed and smelled of grass, when there were fewer paths behind, or so it seemed to a girl with one thin shelf of books, none of them leading backwards yet, down sturdy canonical cobble that had brought us so far, we forgot there ever was a way. Through enormous catalogs of toils, lost to a reliable grunt and root against the rich mire of surface. Lost registers of local fish and rodents, tools, vehicles, and skiffs. A quantity of sunlights, meadows, myths, weapons, kinds of wound, all lost before we ever got them to the tongue's small unfastening of a sound we'll never learn to hear. Like a girl, wild for the right silence, who clamps the fiddle under her chin and fills her jaw with bees, countless, precise, every one a perfect possibility turning in its airy grave. And I'm going to end with a couple of brand new poems I've never read before. These are partly for the mentees, because I've given them an assignment, which I gave myself, to revisit a writer that I loved very much in the past. The problem for me was that I revisited Colette, who I read a lot when I was very young. And I have to admit that though I still love her work a great deal, her biography bothers me a lot. Particularly, I can't quite square myself with the fact that she had an affair with her stepson, who was 16. There's also, I mean, one of her best books is based on it, The Ripening Seed. And it's a beautiful book, and in the last generation, it's a book that most French school children or high school children read, which also seems real strange to me. Anyway, I did spend some time this fall in her hometown trying to re-know her, relearn something about her. This poem is called The Lavoir de Saint-Jean. It's the lavoirs, the old ones in France, are the old stone sort of washing houses that are built around a spring. And she wrote quite a bit about the one in her own village. The other thing you need to know about her village is that its church doesn't have any steeple. The steeple was hit by lightning because there was iron ore underneath, and every time they put a new steeple on, it went on and just caused a problem, so it didn't have any steeple. The Lavoir de Saint-Jean. At 70, she could still repeat the names of the village dead delivered every Sunday of her childhood from the priest in the church unsteepled by a vein of iron clenched beneath its hillock, drawing the electric forks of any storm straight to its green heart. But she did not know her catechism or love her beetle-browed sister. On these points, the biographers agree. Surrounded by believers, one need not believe. The ore that kept the steeple under fire feeds its rust, even now into the spring beneath the hill, where the taste of snow and iron entered the air and belly of the child who would make of place itself of beloved, and pluck its fickle people, one by one, out of the well of kindness. The marvel is not that some things aren't real, but that the real cleaves to what a mind can name most strangely. Even the mute light of a maybe rain on an October day drops a luminous sheet through the open roof of the ruined lavoir, lights up the giant graffiti carved into the wall, and stirs the water from green to gray to brown. Hazel, we'd say, like eyes that ripen and unripen in spectrums borrowed from the sky and belong to she who would repeat the litany of her village dead to beguile Belle Epoque salons, all the while aware that the spring, delivering its taste of iron and snow to the pool in a surge of rolled Burgundian R's, was the only force to be believed. This next one is in this series as well. It's called Boys of the Lamp. Try to imagine the three naked porcelain boys cavorting on the lamp from her view. They're not babies and not girls, breastbones hard and broad as wooden coat hangers, sharp little bisque roses packed among their welter of shoulders, knees, and fists of drapery. Two sit on the back of the third, and all look out of the lamp's frilled trunk in a concentrated gaze, as if the desk before them offers a view of talking monkeys, somersaulting otters, or a mound of busy ants. The lamp is old, and the welts of porcelain carved with grime give the boys a feral touch. It's possible to turn the lamp around and around to lower one's face to the place where the boy's gaze goes, but never to find exactly the place where their gaze includes you. They do not refuse you, but they cannot see you. And if you keep turning the base of the lamp, the cherubs become pensive, even sleepy. Two towheads and one russet, he who is closest to the scene we cannot share. Is it possible to carve one's eye along the porcelain thigh of a naked child and not take the right kind of pleasure? Or is it a question of degree? One imaginary step beyond a limit, a line, a place we're all supposed to know beyond admiring, beyond that place in the mind that looks again, adding pleasure like a wand of color that follows the contours of the body. When you don't understand this, you might look at your own child's body in the tub and know it's yours alone, too beautiful not to share, too horrible to imagine shared. They said she was not immoral but amoral, and celebrated this. These boys would therefore not be decorative. The eye would follow their hard white buttocks and accept whatever the gazer's body gave in return. Like the rag of old cobweb that clings to one child's armpit, or the grime that follows every white swell of them. The eye she would have cast on them was no more or no less than the one she'd cast on a naughty cat, a spicy cassoulet, or the ready apple pulled from someone else's tree. Thank you.